Before you type angry... Well, this is not gonna work, right?
One day, the legend will be born.
The future. I can see it.
No! God, please, no! No!
And today we're talking about Dune. I feel like people woke up in the middle of the night and figured that Dune is actually a good science fiction movie because people went insane for Dune Part 2. And I was sitting there being like, I knew from the beginning Dune Part 1 was already incredible, and I knew that Dune Part 2 was going to be at least as good, if not even better. But we all agree that Dune Part 2 was definitely better than the first one, mostly because I think pacing wise it makes more sense. We're actually building towards something. While the first movie was definitely there to do all of the dirty work, all of the world building, so that we might be able to actually spend some time with our main characters, get attached to them in the second part. And actually the book works that way as well. But a book at the end of the day works in a different way, just because you can access certain characters' inner thoughts. So you end up relating and connecting with them very, very early on. You don't have to wait as long as in the films. And after digesting the second part of the movie and going back and reading Dune Messiah, because I still haven't read it back then, I was sitting there being like, I feel like there is something that I need to talk about. We have to talk about expectations, and we have to talk about how to adapt this book in the most perfect way possible. This is probably a harder book to adapt than the original Dune, mostly because Dune was clearly a space opera. The first book, I mean, it was structured like that as well, while this book here, it kind of ends up feeling like a bridging story in between book 1 and book 3, and those kind of things don't really work really well in our cinemas when you think about it. So this is the problem that we have to deal with. We have a movie that was split into 2 movies, and we have a third movie that is supposed to come out and we still don't know when. And is this gonna be a part 3, or is this gonna be an actual second movie? And this is where my whole argument is gonna start, because basically I think that if Denis Villeneuve adapt Dune Messiah as Dune Part 3, people are gonna hate it.
He's bluffing.
Consider what you're about to do, Paul Atreides.
Silence!
People are gonna hate it, and it's not gonna work as well. I'm gonna try not to spoil too much about the book, especially the beginning of the video, and then I'm gonna be going deep into certain kind of details, especially if we wanna adapt them correctly. Well, the second book starts exactly where the first one ends. We get a bit of a montage and sum up of the Galactic War and everything that happened, and that is basically it. We go deep into political machinations, we go deep into character work and people discussing things. I think we actually don't leave Arrakis for the entire book. We travel a little bit, but we don't travel as much as in the first book. And if we do travel, it's mostly on spaceships, it's not on other planets. So this is the kind of thing where you're sitting there being like, if you're expecting to see a galactic war just because of the expectations that were set up at the end of Dune Part 2, you're gonna be so incredibly disappointed by this movie. And I feel like Denis Villeneuve has to learn to walk around like the Fremen do, so really cautiously when it comes to trying to adapt this story, because he still has to talk about the Galactic War, but the thing is, you have to make up some stuff if you wanna make it as important and impactful as it actually is within the universe. When you're working with books, novels, and especially fantasy novels and sci-fi novels, you can leave quite a lot to the imagination, and the audiences and the readers are not gonna be that bothered by it, mostly because this is what reading a book is about. But you can't really do that with cinema. You have to show, not tell. That's the biggest rule of filmmaking, in my opinion. So I feel like Denis Villeneuve will have to make basically the first act of this movie the Galactic War itself, or he will have to do like what they do with Star Wars, what they do with The Fifth Element, where we have a montage of everything happening all at the same time, thousands of people being sacrificed because of this holy war that is being fought in Paul/Muad'Dib's name, so that we understand the consequences of everything that happened in the first 2 movies, but we don't really participate in them.
We've decoded the intel from the First Order spy, and it confirms the worst. Somehow Palpatine returned.
Oh, fuck. I can't believe you've done this.
Most of the characters that are gonna be in those galactic wars are not gonna be our main characters, or maybe you can keep just one. You could keep Stilgar, for example. He could become a general that leads one of these wars on one of the planets, and we see everything from his perspective. But I still think that you will have to do a montage. You cannot really dedicate too much time to the galactic war because there is a lot of things happening in Dune Messiah that you have to develop in order for everything to make sense and in order for the movie to have a purpose as well. Because this book here was written by Frank Herbert mostly because people were misinterpreting the first book. They didn't really understand that Poe was not supposed to be the hero of the story, that it was basically a cautionary tale of colonization and also extremism, and show how people use religion within politics to motivate the people to commit atrocities at the end of the day. Most people didn't get that, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of people didn't get it either with Dune Part 2, and that's mostly because, have you noticed that one of the main critiques that the movie got was that the final battle didn't last long enough, which is the weirdest thing you could ask, specifically talking about the Fremen, talking about the way that they fight the Empire, and talking about what the Dune movies are actually about. They're not really about war. This is not Star Wars at the end of the day. If you look at the fighting style of the Fremen, it's mostly guerrilla work, meaning that they do terrorist attacks, which are fast-paced, which are zero casualties on their sides, mostly because they're not taking any risks, and they don't really rely on incredibly complex strategies that would probably require 3 different generals and 50 platoons to be executed. Most of the missions that they accomplish are within probably 20 to 10 people being used, and everyone has their own purpose within that specific mission. So that was why I was kind of confused when people criticized this movie by saying that the third act was actually too short and that you couldn't really lead a 4-hour movie of talking, world building and all of that kind of stuff with a war that lasted almost nothing in comparison to the time that you spent building up all of those characters. And I do understand that if you compare this to Lord of the Rings, for example, it doesn't really have the same intentions of Lord of the Rings. I feel like the war is inevitable in Lord of the Rings, while in Dune Part 2 it's really clear that Poe wants to avoid the war as much as possible, and that's why he organized everything so that they could win as fast as possible as well. It's part of his tactics, and that's why he has to put everything on the line at the end of the day and fight his cousin Harkonnen, because he wants to put something in the war of himself as well. He doesn't just want to tell people to die for him, he wants to actually go on the line and fight for everything. Having said that, if you were disappointed by Dune Part 2 because of those reasons, then you're definitely gonna be disappointed by Dune Messiah. And that's why in my title I was like, we should probably not make a Dune Part 3, because we shouldn't make a Dune Part 3, we should make Dune Messiah if you want the story to actually work. And I feel like Denis Villeneuve knows this, mostly because Chani is a completely different character from the book to the movies themselves, and some of that stuff, it could actually lead in interesting things going on. Having said that, if you haven't read the book, maybe I'm gonna give you a little synopsis of what's going on here so that you can understand what I'm talking about. Dune Messiah continues the story of Poe Atreides, better known and feared as the man Kristen Muad'Dib. As Emperor of the Universe, he possesses more power than a single man was ever meant to wield. Worshipped as a religious icon by the fanatical Fremen, Poe faces the enmity of the political houses he displaced when he assumed the throne, and a conspiracy conducted within his own sphere of influence. And even as House Atreides begins to crumble around him from the machinations of his enemies, the true threat to Poe comes to his lover, Chani, and the unborn heir to his family's dynasty. We got a lot of new interesting characters which are part of these machinations and conspiracies. We get the Bene Tleilaxu, which are really weird. If you thought the Harkonnen were weird, well, you have to manage your expectations when it comes to the Bene Tleilaxu, because it's a society of people who basically believe in experimenting on each other, bringing people back to life life from the dead and creating like weird puppets slash cyborgs out of human beings so they can control others. They don't do it as subtly as the Bene Gesserit, that's what I'm saying. It's a completely different society. I think the way they operate is very disgusting, but it's definitely fascinating because they have a very cold approach to everything. We also have the Guild Navigators, and we have a first look at one who's called Edric. We have Saitel, who is a face dancer, and he's basically like a bodyguard slash assassin who can change his face and look like anyone else. And we have one of the main characters from Dune coming back, Duncan Idaho, who was played by Jason Momoa in the original movie. Probably people are gonna find this weird because since there's been almost like another 2-hour movie since we saw Duncan Idaho the last time, people will have forgotten about him, but he has a main role in the book Dune Messiah, and actually I think that he's carrying quite a lot of emotional weight, sometimes even more than Paul Atreides himself. So the thing about this book is that we're mainly talking about the repercussions of the deification and Paul Atreides himself basically trying not to become even more of a god figure to everyone in the universe.
I'm not the Messiah. Will you please listen? I am not the Messiah. Do you understand? Honestly!
Only the true Messiah denies his divinity.
What? Well, what sort of chance does that give me? All right, I am the Messiah. He is the Messiah. Now, fuck off.
He regrets everything that has happened during the Galactic War, and he couldn't stop any of it, and he couldn't control any of it as well, which is very interesting from a political perspective as well. Of course, his sister is gonna be playing a main role in the story as well. She's probably gonna be all grown up and once again played by Anya Taylor-Joy. And since this movie has a lot of talking and a lot of dialogues, it's gonna be quite hard to put up some action sequences because this movie is a bit of a downer when you think about it, because as I said before, Frank Herbert conceived this book as basically a destruction of everything that people believed about Paul Atreides from the first book. So he's gonna spend the entire book putting him down, and he's basically gonna portray him in a pathetic way to the point that we don't really like Paul Atreides anymore, and Paul Atreides doesn't like himself as well. Because of his Kwisatz Haderach's power, he can see everything going on all the time, and this book really explores the idea of almost being able to see too much about the future to the point that there is no joy left in life because you know how everything is gonna be happening, and you also know that sometimes you have to give up certain things just because you have to follow the vision of the future that you have in your mind. And this is basically the tragic aspect of this book, which is probably the most interesting part, and that was basically only hinted at in the first 2 movies, where he got some visions which were not really clear to anyone until they actually happened. In this book here, it's very clear that Paul Atreides can literally see everything that happens constantly, and it's clear to him exactly all the time. So there are no subliminal messages anymore. He's basically become like a superhero at this point, and he can't stand his powers. I feel like this is gonna be something really interesting to explore for Timothée Chalamet as well, because this version of Paul Atreides is kind of a bit more tired. He's definitely more mature as well, and he doesn't spend as much time fighting on the ground with his people and more time actually like wandering around the cities and thinking about the future of his family, of his loved ones, and seeing basically how everyone is against him at this point, whether it is the Bene Gesserit, the Bene Tleilaxu, the Guild Navigators. So the most important people in the universe are against him, and he has to follow this very strict vision if he wants things to go by his way. I actually don't think I want to spoil anything when it comes to the book itself. I mean, I'm not going to tell you who dies, I'm not going to tell you who sacrifices himself, I'm not going to tell you any of the plot twists as well, because I don't think those are the things that we need to worry about when it comes to this adaptation of Dune Messiah. We have to worry about trying to decide what kind of movie this is going to be. Is this going to be yet another weird art house science fiction space opera like the first 2 movies? movies, and is it actually gonna follow exactly what it preaches, or is it gonna be turned into yet another blockbuster thing? And it always happens with sequels when you think about it. Think about Terminator, think about Alien, think about the biggest franchises out there. The second movie in the franchise, almost all the time, it becomes a bit of an action flick which tries to repeat the same journey of the first movie. It doesn't do it as well. Here it's almost impossible to do the same journey as the first movie, of course, because I said it's completely dealing with different things and it has a completely different political structure to it as well. I just hope that Denis Villeneuve is gonna be able to keep his directorial vision and point of view as clear as possible like he did in the first two movies, and that Hollywood is not gonna meddle with it at all. But let's manage our expectations at the end of the day, because as I said, this is gonna be probably an even tougher adaptation than the first one for completely different reasons, and I think they mostly have to deal with expectations. But anyways, what do you think about Dune just in general? Have you read the books? Have you seen the movies? Did you like them? What do you think about David Lynch's version as well? Let me know all of those things down in the comment. And what about what I said? Do you think that we need a Dune Part 3? Or do you actually understand where I'm going with when it comes to trying to completely separate Dune 1 and Dune 2 as much as possible, because they're completely different beasts and they need to be marketed that way as well, so that people go in with the right expectations. But anyways, if you like this video, I'm gonna link you down here as usual all of the good stuff on my channel which talks about the same topics or films that I've talked about today. And here at the top I'm gonna be teasing what I'm gonna be working on for the next few weeks. I'm sorry that it took this long to get this video out, but I'm changing jobs at the moment and every single week I only have 2 days to work on my Torn Apart channel. That's why I also decided to stop working on Torn Apart News, because the main videos, so the one you're watching right now, were getting delayed, and that's not something that I want to do, mostly because Torn Apart News was supposed to be something quick and fast that I could deliver on a weekly basis, and if that starts hindering on the most interesting part of my channel, then I don't want to do it anymore. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to smash that like button, because every single time that you do that, you support Denis Villeneuve with his vision for the Dune universe.
Can I count on you?
If he needs more time to work on it, maybe he needs to work on something different in the meantime, let's do it. Why not? Give him your support, of course. Same goes with all of the creatives working on these films. I'm Patrick, and this is Torn Apart.
I will kill you!
Da